All right, let's get right into it. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to travel back, way back, more than 5,000 years to uncover the actual blueprint of human civilization. We're diving into the incredible story of Sumer. This is a journey into humanity's oldest urban civilization. These were literally the very first people to figure out how to live together on a massive scale. So, if you've ever wondered how we got from living in tiny, scattered groups to building towering cities, developing complex economies, and actually writing down our deepest thoughts, well, you are definitely in the right place.
First, I want you to picture this for a second. Imagine an entirely blank slate. No modern cities, no smartphones, no electricity, no cars. But most importantly, and honestly, this is kind of hard to even wrap our heads around today, no written history. Zero. Human memory was quite literally the only hard drive that existed. If a person died, their specific knowledge, their stories, and their mental ledgers could easily just die right along with them. To really appreciate just how revolutionary the achievements of the Sumerians were, we have to start there, in an empty world where all of these foundational concepts hadn't even been dreamed up yet.
So, looking at this totally blank slate of human history, it brings up a pretty massive question. Where did humanity's first cities actually begin? I mean, out of all the places on Earth, where did people first decide to stop just surviving day to day and start building actual permanent urban centers?
That brings us to Section 1, the first great cities and the birth of urban life.
To answer that question, we have to see how a very specific geographic challenge essentially forced humans to make this first major leap into organized living. The magic happened in southern Mesopotamia. Now, that's a word from ancient Greek that roughly translates to the land between rivers. Those two rivers are the Tigris and the Euphrates, which are mostly located in modern-day Iraq. In this area, it was the ultimate double-edged sword for early humans. The land around these rivers was super flat, it didn't have much timber or stone, but it had something way more valuable: incredibly fertile soil. When the rivers flooded, they dropped this nutrient-rich sediment everywhere. The catch? Rainfall there was completely unreliable. You couldn't just plant a seed and hope for rain. You had to tame the rivers.
To survive, they had to control the water. So step one, they dug these massive irrigation channels and canals to manually move water to the fields. But here's the thing, you cannot build a giant canal by yourself. Which leads us to step two, worker cooperation. Someone had to step up, organize the labor, and maintain those ditches. Once you do that, and you get a huge successful harvest, you hit step three, resource storage. Now you have to figure out how to keep track of all this surplus grain. All of this intense organization and localized population growth leads directly to step four, the birth of genuine urban centers. Cities weren't just some happy accident. They were literally a survival strategy.
And think about how massive this shift actually was. For pretty much all of human history before this, life meant small communities and unwritten rules. But suddenly, in the Sumerian era, you have cities like Uruk. At its peak, Uruk packed in tens of thousands of people living together. Imagine walking through those busy streets with mud brick buildings everywhere, bustling markets, and these towering temple complexes. It was a completely unprecedented type of society that required formalized laws and created specialized jobs. But, as you can probably guess, packing tens of thousands of people into one place created a total logistical nightmare.
Which leads us straight into Section 2, the invention of writing and the desperate administrative need for it.
This population explosion meant they were dealing with administrative chaos. Just imagine you're running a giant temple complex in a Sumerian city. You are responsible for tracking workers, getting their daily rations, farmers delivering massive piles of crops, merchants trading goods, endless animal counts, complex land measurements, and of course, taxes. The human brain is just not wired to memorize thousands of daily economic transactions. Human memory just couldn't cut it anymore. The Sumerians were absolutely drowning in data, and they desperately needed a way to freeze information in time.
So, to manage this chaos, they came up with an absolutely brilliant solution, cuneiform. Now, it's important to remember that writing wasn't invented because someone suddenly got the urge to write a novel. No, it started as a highly practical accounting tool. They took a simple reed stylus and pressed wedge-shaped marks. The word cuneiform actually comes from the Latin word cuneus, meaning wedge, directly into wet clay. At first, they just used basic symbols for things like grain or sheep. But eventually, this accounting system evolved. It got sophisticated enough to represent actual sounds, names, and incredibly complex ideas. Because of writing, a merchant or a ruler could pass away, but their information lived on, perfectly intact on a piece of baked clay.
Let's move on to Section 3, Gods, Kings, and Citizens, and explore the social hierarchy.
Okay, so with the city's logistics finally under control,
Who was actually in charge of these highly competitive, bustling city-states? At the very top of the political food chain was the king, who the Sumerians called the Lugal. That literally translates to the big man or great person. But a Lugal wasn't just your standard political or military leader. The Sumerians firmly believed that the gods were the true owners of the cities, meaning the Lugal only governed because he had divine support. Sure, they led armies and organized those giant irrigation projects we talked about, but they also commissioned massive, stepped mud brick temples called ziggurats, specifically to prove to everyone that they were chosen by the heavens.
And speaking of the heavens, let's take a quick look at the gods they were trying so hard to appease. The Sumerians definitely did not view their gods as distant or abstract concepts. They believed these deities directly controlled their harsh environment and their political fortunes. You had An, who's associated with the heavens, Enlil, the god of supreme power, Enki, who controlled vital fresh water and wisdom, and Inanna, the incredibly powerful and complex goddess of love, fertility, and warfare. Because a sudden flood or a random drought could literally wipe an entire city off the map, keeping these gods happy through non-stop temple rituals wasn't just a religious duty, it was a matter of life and death.
But what about the people below the gods and the kings? Because Sumerian agriculture was so incredibly efficient at producing a surplus of food, an amazing thing happened. Not everyone had to be a farmer anymore. This gave birth to specialized roles. You could become a potter, utilizing the newly invented potter's wheel. You could be a highly skilled metal worker, a merchant traveling to distant lands like modern-day Turkey or Iran, or you could undergo years of rigorous schooling to become a scribe. Society evolved into this incredibly complex web of interdependent trades.
Crucially, women were not invisible in this highly structured world. They could own property and actively participate in the economy. But there is one elite woman who absolutely stands out above the rest, and her name is Enlil. She was the daughter of the famous Akkadian ruler Sargon and served as a high priestess in the city of Ur. She holds an enormous place in historical importance because she is widely recognized as the very first named author in all of human history, period. Her existence really shatters a lot of our modern assumptions and shows us exactly the kind of heights women could reach in ancient Mesopotamian religion and politics.
Now, let's dive into Section 4, Sumerian Innovations, and look at the ideas that changed everything.
The Sumerians were constantly pushing boundaries, and their brilliance literally still impacts your life today. Take the number 60, for example. While we mostly use a base 10 math system today, the Sumerians used a sexagesimal system which is heavily based on the number 60. They needed this advanced math to measure their vast fields, calculate massive grain yields, and engineer those towering ziggurats. But why does this matter to you? Well, just look at a clock. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle. You are utilizing ancient Mesopotamian mathematics every single time you check your watch. It's wild.
And as their cities grew larger and more complex, they also had to innovate how humans treated one another. Enter the Code of Ur-Nammu, dating all the way back to the 3rd millennium BCE. It's one of the earliest surviving law codes we have. Think about it. When you have tens of thousands of people living on top of each other, you can't rely on personal revenge or casual neighborhood justice anymore. You need formalized, written rules for bodily injury, property disputes, marriage, and compensation. The Sumerians brought written, objective order to their crowded, bustling streets long before the more famous Code of Hammurabi even existed.
But despite all their laws and their advanced math, they grappled with the exact same anxieties that we do today. The Epic of Gilgamesh is one of their most famous literary traditions. It follows a hugely powerful king who, after experiencing profound, devastating grief, becomes completely obsessed with finding a way to defeat mortality. But the ultimate realization he comes to is that humans cannot escape death. What survives isn't your physical body, but what you build, what you create, and the legacy you leave behind. It's such an incredibly humanizing story, and it perfectly bridges that massive 5,000-year gap between us and them.
And that brings us to our final chapter, Section 5, The Fall and Legacy, and the Lingering Echoes of Sumer.
Because as Gilgamesh learned the hard way, absolutely nothing lasts forever. Over the centuries, massive macro shifts in power totally transformed the region. For a long time, Sumer was just a collection of independent, fiercely competing city-states constantly fighting over land and water rights. Then, Sargon of Akkad sweeps in, creating a massive territorial empire and absorbing Sumer completely. Later on, Sumerian power actually revives during the incredibly bureaucratic 3rd dynasty of Ur, which, by the way, left behind mountains of clay tablets. But eventually, early in the 2nd millennium BCE, A mix of internal instability, intense economic pressure, and outside attacks from the Elamites and Amorites caused the whole system centered on to catastrophically collapse. But here's the beautiful part. The Sumerians didn't just vanish into thin air. A really fascinating linguistic shift happened. As an everyday spoken language on the streets, Sumerian was gradually replaced by Akkadian. However, it was carefully preserved as a scholarly and religious language. It's actually a lot like how Latin was used in medieval Europe. Sumerian remained the language of elite education and sacred religious texts for centuries after it stopped being spoken at the market. The people themselves were simply absorbed into the broader, evolving Mesopotamian civilization, carrying their cultural DNA right forward into Babylon and Assyria.
And that leaves us with this final, profound thought to take away from today's explainer. A civilization can disappear, but what it records can survive for thousands of years. The Sumerian kings are long gone. Their massive mud-brick ziggurats have mostly crumbled into dust. Their everyday language went completely silent. But because they took a simple reed stylus and pressed it into wet clay just to manage their cities, their voices achieved a kind of immortality. They left us the very blueprint of urban life, proving that while our time here is limited, the knowledge we share can literally echo through eternity. So it makes you wonder, what kind of legacy are we writing on our own modern clay tablets for the future? Thanks so much for joining this explainer, and keep exploring.